Happy Thursday to everyone. Hey, Alex, I see you. Can you hear me, Alex?
Yes.
Awesome. Happy Thursday to everyone. Thank you for joining today. Really fired up about this session with Alex on Esports 101. The goal of today is really to show you all a little insight into how esports works, how you should be thinking about it in the sports world, and potential content ideas that you can spin up on your own. Little quick housekeeping. Alex, just give me a quick sec. Oops, here we go. Today's the last session of this week. Next week, we got a couple of sessions that are going to be very impactful. One is going to be a roundtable conversation with some of the G5 schools that we work with and how they're maximizing their content, given the not as many resources as they have. And then we're going to talk with a good friend of mine, Stuart, at the Miami Dolphins, who's going to talk about how they quick turn the amount of content that they capture in the live environment. Miami Dolphins are one of the best in the NFL when it comes to how they're able to quickly capture and upload content, as well as giving it a little bit of treatment and adding some branding to it. It's going to be very, very insightful. Post your Twitter account and your LinkedIn in the chat. Nikki's going to be capturing all of them and putting them in a Google Sheet and sharing with you all so you can network amongst each other. And then ask questions throughout this. This is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do, where I'm going to hand it over to Alex, and he's going to go through what he's got prepped, and we're going to save all the questions until the end. And then that way you'll have a full picture of kind of what he's put together, and hopefully a lot of the questions that you might have will probably get answered with what he's put together. So Alex, you ready for this?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to swap out this to what you put together. Here we go. And if you see the little arrows up here, Alex, you can like swap through them on your end.
Oh, cool. Nice.
So I'm going to go on mute, and I'll be around and listening here, Alex, but it's all you.
Well, sweet. Thank you, Nita. Hey, everyone. My name is Alex Rubens. I run team operations for esports at Kroenke Sports and Entertainment. Specifically right now, we have two teams. One is the Los Angeles Gladiators, which is in Overwatch, which I'll explain a little bit more about the games and teams and how that all works later. And then the other one is the LA Guerrillas, which is in Call of Duty. So my background has been in esports before coming to KSE. I worked at YouTube and Riot, and Riot makes League of Legends, which is the biggest esport in the world, and Red Bull Media House on esports before. So been in the esports space for a while, so have done a lot of different things, and hopefully can tell you a lot about questions that you might have related to esports. I've done a lot of talks around what esports is for the most basic audience, because I think that's part of what we need right now. We'll get to it a little bit later, but I think the cool thing is when you talk about like what is esports, the answer is really undefined at this point. And I think that's pretty unique and cool. So I want to do as much as I can to get that message out there and try to give people the information that they need to interact with it and to take esports and make it personalized and unique to their business and their teams and really engage based on that. So the way that I think this talk works best is if we sort of walk through the basics of what esports even is, and then we can really get into questions. Because I think when it comes to esports, people see the articles and they see, oh yeah, it's a bunch of people playing games, and it's a bunch of, lots of people go and they play video games and they watch video games, and what does it really mean? I think if you don't have the basics down, then really the questions of how it's applicable to you mean very little. And so I want to kind of go through that, but then I think where it gets most impactful, like Nita said, is really just breaking it down individually and talking through specific questions. So that's my goal here. So I'm just going to kick it off with some talking points. So what is esports? So that at its most basic, esports is competitive gaming of any kind, right? That could be you and your four friends in college pounding Coors Light and playing Halo until 4 a.m, or it could be Overwatch League Grand Finals, which you can see in the photo in the back. That took place in Philadelphia and was huge. Tons of people there. I think like around 10,000, which is pretty cool. They typically use NBA-sized stadiums, actual NBA stadiums rather, to fill these events. Obviously, the setup's a little different. It's not in the round. There's a huge stage. Some events are in the round, but sometimes people really like with a game like Overwatch, it's very visual. So you do unique setups that maybe feel a little more like concerts than traditional sporting events. So esports is super unique, and that's just one way. But I think ultimately, if you think through what is esports, it can really be whatever you want, and I think that's what makes it so cool, right? So there's competition at all levels. I think that's my next line. Yeah, different types of esports. There's competitions at all different types of levels, right? So we play in the highest tier of the pro leagues. These are in franchise leagues that we had to pay money to become a team in, which is pretty unique. And that's something that's only really been developed in esports in the last couple of years. So we participate in 2 of those leagues. Like I said, Overwatch and Call of Duty. There's a couple other ones out there, League of Legends, which you'll see the photo right now. That's the LCS, which is North America's League of Legends league. There's leagues all over the world, China being the biggest, but North America switched to franchising in the last 2 years. And so one of the teams here, Cloud9, is a part of that as well. So there's that sort of tier of games. And then there's other games that get more viewership and have even more teams participating in them, but they're not franchised. We could take 5 of us here, and if we're good enough, we pay to figure out how to send us to these events, and we can go and participate and qualify and play for big money. When you talk about some of these franchise leagues, the money is, a couple $1 million over the course of the season. I think for Call of Duty and Overwatch, it's somewhere around 5 or 6 million each, split up amongst the teams. But there are some events out there. There's a game called Dota 2, which is it's similar to League of Legends, but a different game. And that's where I think esports is also unique, is there's different flavors of every game you might want to play, which leads to a lot of opportunity. But Dota has a prize pool that's actually funded by fans. So the publisher of that game who makes it, they put in some money, and then they create cool goods based around the event, digital goods, which could be outfits or tokens, a memorabilia, something that you can see in the game. And they use that, the sale of those goods to fund the prize pool. And typically that reaches around $25-30 million every year. And the cool thing about esports is part of that goes to the organization, but the other part goes to players. It's really dependent on the game of how that split happens. So overnight, someone could go from being a random kid in Indonesia playing games online with their 4 friends. They come together, they build a team, they start to qualify, they start to make it pretty far, and next thing you know, they make a $30 million split amongst 5 people. So it's pretty crazy, and I think esports is very young, and that's very different than how a lot of other sports work, but that's partially what makes it so unique. So esports can be anything from sort of all of those different tiers. There's colleges that have teams. There's a high school program. Last year, the program that operates all of the high school sports actually partnered with a company that made League of Legends an official high school sport. So you can take esports and actually get PE credit for it, which is pretty crazy and pretty unique. And I think it's a really good way of engaging people at all levels of competition. And that's not to say that esports work in the traditional sports environment, which, I can get to, where you go, hi, I'm a fan, and then I play in high school, and then I'm really good there, and then I go to college esports, and then eventually I go to pro esports. It's not really how it works. Esports operates, like I said, in all these different tiers at the same time. So on our teams, we have multiple players who are all 18 or just turned 18. That's typically the threshold that you need to be able to play in the pro leagues legally. But they didn't start in a college team. They maybe from the age of 14 were playing on amateur teams and trying to showcase their skills and get better, and might have even been scrimmaging pro teams. That's another thing that makes esports unique, is if you have players who are really good, you don't really care whether they're on a professional team or not. Our guys, when we had our last event for Call of Duty, they actually didn't practice against pro teams. We brought in the best amateur team who we knew we wouldn't be playing in the tournament, and we just played against them for 2 days straight, 12 hours a day, to get the best practice that we could. So it doesn't follow that traditional path. There's so many different paths that you can be taking. And it's pretty cool because even if you're not good enough to be a pro, you might still be able to go to college and actually get a scholarship based on your play, right? So I think it's just a really unique way to get involved, whether you're a player or if you think about all those different tiers that I just said, that's ways that you can get established in whatever you're doing, right? If you're an advertiser, who's to say that you don't want to advertise on the big leagues, but instead you want to advertise with college esports, right? Maybe your product is a lot more applicable to those people. And even though there might be demographic overlap, being really focused on buying into where you can, I think is something that you can do across all different levels of esports. So it's pretty unique in that regard. And I'd say that it also when you think about what makes it different is that really all barriers are removed to be a professional esports player. You can play wherever you want. There's obviously latency issues where if you ever had buffering in a video, that happens even worse when you're trying to play a game. Some of our guys will be playing people maybe today who are, those players are in Korea. So we have people playing from LA to Korea, which is a pretty rough internet journey, but you can do that, right? Whereas you can't play a pickup game or practice with really any other sport that isn't online with people that far away, or people in different regions or different leagues or anything. So it's pretty interesting when it comes to that. And I'd say that there's also a lot of different barriers removed when it comes to the actual player, right? There's nothing that says you have to be in the most physically fit shape. We try to make sure that our guys are. I think it helps mentally and physically to have that, but you don't have to worry about those barriers. So it's pretty different. And then I think there's only 2 more slides, and then we can start getting to a couple questions, because I think when we start to talk about the future of esports, it's really so undefined. And to me, that's what makes it exciting. If you had to ask me what esports looks like in 5 years, I don't know that I would be able to give you a great answer. Looking back on the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, people would have said that it is organized team sport. It is, these franchise leagues. That's the only thing people are going to be watching. They're going to be the biggest thing. But then 2 years ago, Fortnite came out, completely changed that. It became the biggest esport in the world for a while in terms of viewership, which viewership is something that esports is really beholden to. I think they like to use it as a way to prove themselves against other traditional sports. You guys have probably heard the metric of more people watch the League of Legends World Finals than NBA Finals, MLB World Series, and all this other stuff combined. I don't think it's really a valid metric. It's definitely true if you look at certain raw numbers, but I don't think it does justice to the comparison. But esports is finally starting to work on not having to make up stuff to prove themselves. But that's a thing that people really like to look back on. So if you look at Fortnite, it was the biggest esport in the world. It was a solo game. I just played by myself. It had nothing to do with teams. And it became the biggest thing in the world, right? You have Drake and Travis Scott playing with gamers. You have NBA guys. We still to this day have a lot of guys in the NBA or NFL who play regularly with our gamers because they started playing Fortnite together, and they realized you don't have to be good. You can just hang out and have a good time. And part of that sort of all builds together to be competitive gaming. So it's been really unique. So I think that's where, if you look at what the future could hold, sure, it could be these franchise leagues. Some game could come out tomorrow that does something completely different and really reinvigorates the scene in a completely different area of the market. So it's been really unique. And I think that's true when you look at Fortnite or even NBA 2K. I think people thought that the 2K league was going to be huge. Maybe the way that it was hyped up is incorrect, because I think that some people called it a failure when it first came out. The 2K league is some teams opt in to play with virtual teams of theirs in NBA 2K, the NBA's video game. And you actually draft players or pick players who play virtually on the team. And they play each in a position. It's not just 1v1. You're actually playing 5 people against 5 people on these teams. And people said it was going to be the biggest thing ever. And then viewership didn't necessarily get there. And I think some people wrote it off as a failure, which isn't accurate, right? Like I said, there's all these different levels of esports and what it can be. And I think there's something to really be said about figuring out exactly what you want and doing it really well, even if it's not necessarily the biggest and best thing ever. So to me, I don't think it's a failure at all. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned from sort of attacking certain areas of the market and really not trying to compete against people who just have bigger audiences or bigger resources than you. So we can get into, when you guys have questions too, a lot of the different games and where your teams and companies might be uniquely positioned to jump into a specific game or market. But I think it's important to remember that too. And then when I think and talk about how the future can go even further, is that if you look in this photo here, this is the Overwatch League teams. This is the new jerseys that they made for this year. That's ours in the upper left-hand corner, the Gladiators with the luscious hair. That's Space. He's one of our big players. The guy in the middle on the bottom is Jeff Staple, who's a pretty legendary streetwear designer. He designed the jerseys for the league this year. And I think traditionally, most esports jerseys have been gross. They're basically the worst kind of material you would ever think about. And they're all like sweat wicking, you know, performance wear. And they kind of seem like that shirt that your dad found at Big Five and like mows the lawn in. It's just like the weirdest material in the world. But for some reason, esports think, hey, even though we don't have money to really be a Nike and design these amazing jerseys, we're going to still wear the same sports material. And I think it was like sort of a goofy decision to back into sports. And so people have really started changing and figuring out exactly what makes esports unique and what type of things that you can build around it. So these are actually a lot more comfortable than the traditional jerseys. And in my mind, this is something I would actually buy to support a team. I think, like I said, most of them are pretty gross and I wouldn't even want to wear it, even if the design was cool traditionally. So this is sort of the first step in what I think a lot of teams are realizing, that part of the biggest play of being a sports team is not just competing, but it's about everything else that you build around it. Obviously, that sounds like the easiest thing in the world that you would think of, but a lot of people just never really thought of it, right? So content, they were really good at. If you want, there's probably a documentary series for every single esports team that's ever existed. Most of them probably have 200 views and some of them have 200,000. It shows the variety of I guess, fans for each team, but it also shows just how saturated the market was with that type of thing. But people were completely ignoring how the next logical steps of having a team could be. And so apparel has become a huge one. People are trying to transition and finally understand that it's not just merchandise, right? It's not just the stuff that the league puts out for your team that's, you know, for every fan and could be this. It's the same for every team in the league, but it's actually apparel. 100 Thieves has been, that's another team in a lot of these leagues. They're in League of Legends. It's one of their primary pillars of their business. They do drops similar to Supreme or Palace or any of these streetwear brands where, you know, once every month or 2 months, they say, hey, at noon, you can get this exact one thing and it's going to sell out in the next 10 minutes. And for them, it's become such a big thing that if you go to our Call of Duty events, which they do not compete in our league, and they probably have just as much merch there or apparel as we do. And I think that says a lot about if you can actually integrate in an authentic way with esports, you're giving fans something that they can connect with other fans over, whether it's super relevant or not. So I think when it talks about the future and how you guys can be involved specifically, I think taking a lot of the core principles of what people have known in sports for the last 30, 40, 50 years and applying them directly to esports, there's so much knowledge that can be gained, even if not directly applied, but the thought process, right? The thought process of why are you doing this thing specifically and taking it and flipping it to a way that's authentic to esports. For me, that's the next logical step. That's something that we're working on a lot, is how we can do that in not just saying, oh, let's film a documentary series. Let's put apparel on our guys the same way that some of these other teams do, but really taking a step back and understanding what we want and then trying to back into the principles that we've learned as a company and apply them to our esports teams. So when it comes to how you can be involved, I think that there's a ton of opportunity just for knowledge and for taking what you guys have and really authentically pairing it with esports. But I think there's also a ton of crossover. So I didn't look at the exact list of everyone who's here, but I know for a fact that there are people on the call who might have players or staff members or someone who could directly get involved with esports and maybe already is too, right? Like I said, there's a lot of NBA players. We have players from the Heat and the Pelicans who stream on Twitch, which is one of the big platforms that esports is broadcast on, and play with our guys on a regular basis. And I mean, man, they're just as good as some of our guys, right? Because they put the same amount of time in and they have those skills and that thought process. And so I think that finding opportunities to really integrate the two and integrate esports into your companies and your teams, utilize the resources that you already have, because there's so much really, really easy links where 80% of the work is already done. There are already gamers on your teams, are already gamers in your companies. So you just have to find them and find natural ways to make it happen. So I think that if you can take all of that knowledge and take the work that's already done, you can find pretty natural ways to integrate amongst the teams. And after that, I think it's just important to start answering questions. And to be honest,
Yeah.
too, you might say one question and I might talk for another 20 minutes on one answer. It's not going to be a rapid fire, but I think that's a good way for us to figure out, at least you have some basics. And if obviously, if there's anything that you think I missed, Nita, definitely feel free to chime in. But yeah.
I've been writing down a couple of questions I wanted to ask you to kind of talk about the landscape of competitive gaming in a macro view. So obviously Fortnite was really popular back in 2018, 2019. What would you say right now is the current state of the game?
I think it's still really popular, right? It's one of those things where it broke through the cultural barrier at the time. Everyone was talking about it. I think people were playing on their phones, and the amount of people who have a PlayStation 4 when it's free is insane. So people who maybe only ever play 2K, Call of Duty, Madden, or just use their PlayStation to watch movies, to watch Netflix, we're giving it a shot, right? And so I think it sort of broke through that barrier, and everyone was talking about it. It's still huge, though. That's the thing about gaming that I think. Sorry?
To who? Like, who's the core demographic of Fortnite?
I think it's probably mainly kids. It's a free game, so you can play. When you think about how a lot of esports get really big, is that they're free and they can run on hardware that is easily accessible. So for something like Fortnite, that's the PlayStation 4. There's 100 million of them out there. That's a lot of PlayStation 4s and people who could be playing it. For something like League of Legends, that could literally run on a MacBook Air from 2012, or it could run on a $4,000 gaming PC. So I think getting to that audience is part of why Fortnite was so successful. It wasn't the first game to do that format of you're on an island, you drop in, and you got to find things and get to a small circle, but it was the one who did it in the most approachable way. And I think that's why it got so big and is still so big to this day, even if it's fallen off the cultural radar.
Interesting. Are you seeing a lot more movement right now with everyone being remote to, obviously people are playing games, but are you seeing people kind of pick up the more industry standard games, or is it all just like, we're going to play 2K, we're going to play Madden, and we're going to make that half-assed attempt to try and play gaming?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point, right? I think a lot of people are home right now playing games. Yeah. If you look at most of the gaming stocks, for a while, they were one of the only ones that were actually up, is because people were buying a ton of games and really participating at a much deeper level when, you eliminate 40 minutes of commute each way and people suddenly have time to start playing a little bit more games, right? And so for us, we know that there's been a huge uptick in the games that we compete in people playing in them regularly. And it's been a little weird because when you think about viewership of the actual leagues themselves, every single sport in the world is put on hold. Ours aren't. We're still playing. So Overwatch started 2 weekends ago. Call of Duty starts tomorrow. It still takes work to broadcast these games, right? It's not just like me sitting here and clicking like share screen and recording my gameplay. They have full production broadcast teams that use the same setups and the same trucks that major sporting events do. So transitioning that to work online has been a little difficult, but I think you're seeing a much greater involvement in people who are playing the games and then actively wanting to learn more. And that's where I think esports actually gets a lot of its audience too, is people go like, oh, there are pro 2K players. What do they do that I don't do? Or like, what can I learn from them in 10 minutes that allows me to like beat my friend later? And so I think right now you're getting a lot more people playing games. So once the leagues kick back online, I think people are just going to be watching a lot more, trying to understand and trying to become a part of the community and everything associated with that.
Which leads me to my next question. Obviously, the NBA has their 2K league. The NFL has made similar attempts. Who would you say right now from a professional sports league is doing it best or taking the best approach to esports?
It's a good question because they're also different, right? And I think the attempts that you make, they're kind of unique to what you want to get out of it, right? So like 2K League and MLS and all of the soccer tournaments as part of that, they're really going for like, we want to build a structured league and system to support the digital components of our game, right? And it's a really good way to get fans to engage, but also just to help sell these products. And that's an important reminder of why esports even exists. Obviously, like I said, it could go anything from pounding beers and playing Madden with your friends to pro leagues, but they're really advertising for the games. And so I think if you look around, hey, we as the NBA want to make sure that more copies of 2K are being sold because it gets us more money. And 2K is like, yeah, we obviously want that too. So let's put some money together and try to figure out how we can utilize the collective resources of the two and build something that brings in new fans and retains them within sort of the NBA 2K ecosystem. And so I think that's one approach to it. I think when you look at what the NFL is doing, they try some similar stuff with Madden, but I think partially where the best of those, and I know it's not really the league itself, but I think the INFLCR actually does a really good job of bringing in opportunities for their players to get involved. And I think when you look at it, most people, if they see, Gronk doing something at the time, they wouldn't think like, oh, that's the PA. They just see that as like the NFL, right? And so I think that's probably been the most visible outside of something like the 2K League, which to me, it's a little bit harder because even though it's associated with the NBA, it's not NBA players doing it. So I think there's sort of two separate markets there. But I think that they all do a pretty good job by figuring out what they want that's unique and then really driving that home. I'd say that if you had to think about the two, the NBA did it the best with leagues, and I think the PA does it the best with NFL players.
Interesting. You've obviously worked in your past and current roles with a lot of both esports athletes and professional athletes. Who would you say, if you were assembling 5 guys in the pro sports world, would be your starting 5 for a game of, pick your game? Call of Duty.
That's really good. I think first off, you'd have to take Josh Hart, Myers Leonard. They're both NBA players, and they're huge gamers. And then from there, I'd probably just ask them who's the best. I know they play with a lot of other guys who are in those similar sort of tiers as them in the NBA. De'Aaron Fox is huge. He actually has a gaming channel on YouTube where you play Call of Duty. That most of these guys actually don't want to play NBA 2K because they're upset about their stats, but they like playing Call of Duty or Fortnite or any of the other sort of shooters that are out there. I think they like shooters a lot. But those 3 would be the first to jump to my mind. And I think from there, there's a ton of other people. Todd Gurley came to our Call of Duty home series event that we did at the Shrine and played in a gunfight battle, which is like 2v2 against Michael B. Jordan and a couple other celebrities. So there's a lot of guys that are able to do it. But I'd say those 3 would be my first 3 picks.
Interesting. You touched a little bit on merchandise and how that, how some teams are adapting to that. I know 100 Thieves has done a really fantastic job with selling their merch, which kind of begs into the question of what is the business model behind that?
Yeah, so esports is somewhat unique, right? So when it comes to certain teams and certain leagues, you're beholden to what the league is able to provide you, right? Like if we wanted to go and make merch right now and sell it to our fans as our teams, we actually couldn't because we're a part of these leagues where they control the merchandising rights around a lot of it, right? So we could go to them and say, we want something like this. Could you figure it out? And they could make it happen and get it done. But we couldn't just go out there and sell it. But esports, typically you're not just operating in one league, right? So 100 Thieves operates in 4 or 5 different leagues under the same name, where the leagues retain none of the rights to do that stuff. They might retain the rights to their specific jersey in that game or that game's related merchandise for the team, but they don't control everything overall. So I think when you look at it, it's actually a really unique opportunity to build fans and create things for them that can work for any of your games and any of the leagues that you compete in. So it's a huge opportunity to create something that really builds true long-term fans around any of the stuff that you do. And when it comes to the business model, esports as a business right now is rough. So if you think about most of these leagues and most of the teams immediately losing tons of money, right? That's just the stage that it's at right now. If you're spending, a couple $1 million on rosters, but you're not retaining a couple $1 million in sponsorships or merchandising revenue, then it's just not really working out at the time. I think people are really building for the future, right? People aren't just saying like, what is it right now? I think it'd be a little ridiculous to assume that you could spend as much money as you are on rosters and putting on events and assume you can get it all back in the first couple of years. That's not how business works, but that's the stage that esports is at right now. So when you look at merchandising and apparel, it's one of those areas where people want to support your team. They're such diehards. Like I said, they could be fans from all over the world. And so it's a really easy, I say easy in quotes because it's really hard to do something unique, but it's an easy way to actually find something that you can bring return on. So if you look at 100 Thieves, we can stick with that example because they probably do the best with apparel, but there's 3 pillars to it, right? You have your content portfolio that you can make money on. You have your competitive portfolio, which you can get some prize money depending on the game. And then you have your merchandising and apparel. And so if you're thinking about the content one, it might be really expensive to do, but you're probably actually making some money back on it, at least if people are watching it. I think, like I said, a lot of teams, people don't always watch everything. It's just the saturation of the market. When it comes to competitive, you're spending so much money on salaries that if you're not the best team in the world, it's probably just pretty hard to get. And there's obviously league-wide deals that you get some portion of, or whatever. You get some money back from there, but again, it's not super significant. When it comes to merch, you can do things that are unique. You can do things that using the data around your truly online fans that they'll buy, and then you can do it in a way where they're actually willing to pay pretty significant money for a lot of this stuff. So you don't have to go with $20 shirts. I think our jerseys for Overwatch League are $160, which is pretty wild. And so I think for them, and us and every team, you should look at it as one of the areas that you fully control that you can make significant revenue in. So, and then it all ladders back to your other principles of bringing people to events and getting them to watch your content and be a true fan.
So one of the things you said off the top was esports is not profitable. I remember back in 2015 when there was a land rush to start investing in esports, and you started to see a lot of good PR stories around, Robert Kraft was investing, 20 million into an esports team. The NBA was shifting towards an esports team. Do you think that a lot of that early investment in esports has turned a profit, or are they still in the red?
Sure. So, I said it's not profitable. I think that that's somewhat of a general statement. I think it can be, right? And I said in the beginning of the seminar that I think if you find what you want to do and you're really good at it, you totally can be profitable, right? If you keep costs down or you're super focused on a market that you can monetize, you can totally make money. I think as a whole, esports spend a lot of money putting on these events. It's not cheap to rent out Staples Center and put on this huge show with 3D projection mapping, which is pretty interesting. If people want to go look up the 2016 League of Legends World Finals, they actually took where people would normally be playing basketball in Staples Center and projection mapped a 3D opening ceremony to the event, which I was there in person. It was pretty wild to see something like that in real life. But that stuff's expensive, right? And so I think and you can make media deals, you can make team merch sales, you can make money through all these things. You can make money by having teams like Bob Kraft put in $20 million or whatever it is to the leagues. But it's really about how much you're spending on part of that. And I think that's where our team has tried to be really focused around doing that smartly. I think if you look at some games, the salaries are pretty wild. I know that in League of Legends, there are single players on teams making as much money as the 10 players that we have signed on our team combined, which is pretty crazy. So hopefully you have the ability to monetize that at 10 times whatever I do to make some return back. But I think it can be profitable. And I think that there are some people who have totally made their money back, right? If you look at the valuations of some of these companies, 100 Thieves went from being started 2 years ago with, its CEO as the one content creator signed to it, to now being valued at, tens of millions of dollars on the high end of that, towards the 100 million range, which is pretty crazy, right? And so there's definitely value that way. When it comes to that, I always think who's going to buy that? But you see true value there, right? And I think that's
the exception to this, though, because they have their own merch, they do podcasts, they create a bunch of content, and they're doing branded content. Not every team is like that.
For sure. No, and that's builds off of what I said earlier. There are some teams that their documentary series have 200,000 views or 2 million views, and there are some with 200, right? So there's a lot of teams involved. And I think a lot of traditional sports investors thought, hey, if we jump into this and we just do what everyone else is doing, it's really going to work out because we have the power of our team behind it. And that's not true.
Audience.
Yeah, it's not true at all, right? And I think it's especially not true when you join and then you just hire people who are already there, right? You didn't bring your knowledge into it. And so I think that that's that's one area where people probably haven't made their money back. But there are a ton of people who spend significant money and find ways to monetize around it. There are teams like TSM and Cloud9 that are in all sorts of games. They're in League of Legends, they're in Counter-Strike, they're in Fortnite, they're in everything. And those teams are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, where they know that they can spend $10,000 on one episode of a YouTube video because they're going to make back $20, $30, $50,000 from it, right? So there are certain teams that can do that. There are other teams that spend $10,000 on a video and don't even get 10,000 views. And they certainly don't make more than $10 on it, right? So I think that it can be profitable, and some people definitely have made their money back. But I think if you look at the people that you mentioned, the NBA teams, the Robert Krafts, us, we're not looking at being profitable now. What we want is something where in 25 years, we want to have a business that's actually sustainable and actually builds serious long-term profit, not like, oh, cool, well, in 10 years, we made like $1 million on this. And that's not like super interesting to spend like 30, 40, $100 million and make like very little profit. You want to build something that is long-term sustainable, is a true asset that builds long-term large profitability. And I think right now we're in the phase that, like I said, there are a lot of teams booming and a lot of teams busting. So hopefully we can find long-term sustainability that leads to profitability over time. Because right now there's, if you're an advertiser coming into the space and you say, hey, I want to advertise, which team should I advertise on? And there's like 200 teams that all look the same to you. What are you going to do, right? You're going to give it to the person who can't execute because they're cheaper or something. And then it just busts. So,
yep. Before we get to some of these other questions, last one from me. What is the benefit to being part of a team versus actually streaming on Twitch or YouTube and being able to drive your own revenue that way? And then one of the things that I've read about with esports is that the athletes that are participating in it, they burn out really quickly.
Yeah.
I actually live in the building that I live in. There's a guy who's like, I'm 21 and he's like, I'm retired. And so I don't understand that. And also I don't understand why some of these guys are going to be part of a team versus actually streaming on their own.
Yeah, totally. So I think the two are actually related. So when you talk about burnout, it's really bad for esports pros, right? They're 18 years old. They've been playing the game for like, some of our guys play for like 16 hours a day to train every day, right? They don't have like a Saturday and Sunday that they take off. We force them to take time off. So we force off days and we force physical training and mental training and all of that. But they can still say like, cool, it's my off day. I just want to get better. So I'm going to play 16 hours again. That definitely leads to burnout, especially if you think about doing that for 4 years at a time. And then maybe you're getting older, your mental, your dexterity goes down and some other kid comes in who's been playing for a year and just whoops you and you're relegated to the bench. You'd feel really burnt out when that happens, right? And I think, unfortunately, that's when a lot of people consider going and becoming a streamer. But if you really haven't built towards that, it's just not going to work. Some of our players, they can be, the biggest personalities in a competitive league. They might have, 2,000 people wearing their specific player jersey in an arena. But then if they go to stream on Twitch just like tomorrow, unless they do a really good job of building up around that, there's not going to be that many people, right? And I think ultimately when you talk about streaming is even more of a grind than just being a pro gamer. Being a pro gamer, like you can sit there and you can play video games for 4 hours. I know I can, and just play Call of Duty and just hang out and have fun because you're not on, right? You're like relaxing. You might be training. You might be trying to get better, but you're just playing the game. When you think about streaming, you have so much that you have to do. Your brain is split in two different ways, which I think also contributes to burnout somewhat. And then you're completely on, you're entertaining. You can't like get up and go to do a bathroom break. And they'll also stream for like 16 hours. And I think a lot of people will even do like 24 hours straight a lot of times. And you can make good money, right? People can subscribe to you on Twitch, which they pay $5. You get a portion of that. And it's as a recurring monthly subscription. They can also just donate, or you can have some kind of challenges or sell merch or do anything. But that's a grind, right? If you think about it, being someone where if you maybe make $100 tonight streaming on Twitch, your next thought is, cool, I made $100. Now I have to do it again tomorrow or I'll make no money tomorrow, right? So sometimes being a pro gamer and then switching is actually the better call because, our guys get paid really well, whether they win or lose or whether they start or ride the bench. Right. So being a pro gamer is hard. I think that it's a good opportunity to have a stable income in gaming. And also most of those guys, they would stream, but they just want to win. Like our guys, they just want to compete, and it's what they love the most. Through this whole coronavirus thing, where our leagues were also sidelined for a little while, they were mad. They were like, we'll play wherever. Like, we'll play like online. Like, they were like, I'll put on a hazmat suit and go play. Like, I just want to play. I just want to win, right? And so I think for them, they put a lot of that pressure on themselves, and that can also contribute to that stuff. But it's just a tough life in general. It sounds easy because you're just playing video games, but it's a lot of hard work, and it's also staring at a screen, which I think is just pretty rough in general for that amount of time.
Which leads into the first question from Matt Beatty. An issue that comes up in our industry is that esports isn't physical activity. You mentioned that some teams train and focus on staying in good physical shape. What is the benefit to being in better physical shape in terms of playing in esports?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it changes depending on your game too. But most of the time, these guys they might train at a house or an apartment, but they're not actually playing there, right? So all of our guys, they live in one team house, which we think it's pretty unique to esports, but it also has, they're young guys. And I think a lot of times you need to develop them in how to work as part of a team. So it's really good for bonding and learning from each other in that aspect. But they're traveling all around the world, right? This was the first year that the Overwatch League went from being solely in LA, even though we had team names from different places, to actually being around the world, right? So there was originally, before all this happened, we were going to be on the road from February 1st to like October 1st, like every week. And not just like, oh, we're going up to San Francisco and then we're going to Dallas. Like we had those, but we also, in February, we played 3 times in China and 1 time in Korea and then Dallas. And then we're flying back and we're going to play in the US and bounce around. And a lot of these guys, if you're sitting down playing games all the time and then you're subjecting yourself to that travel, for me, I was worried. I was like, one of these guys just isn't going to make it. He's going to get super sick. He's not going to want to fly. He's like, it's just not going to happen. And then we're a little bit stuck. So for us, we saw immense value in 1, just keeping them healthy. And then 2, I'm sure everyone, when you like go for a good run or get a good workout in, you're like, oh, I feel good, right? Yeah. That's what we want for them, especially when they're then going to go sit down in a chair for 16 hours.
So if they're traveling that much and they need to play for 16 hours a day, how are they keeping on top of it while they're traveling?
Yeah, it's really tough. Okay. That's one of the biggest issues with a lot of the switches to sort of traveling around those leagues. And that league is uniquely doing that too, right? Most of the other leagues, so if you think about something like Counter-Strike, sure, you might travel to Romania or Germany or Rio or something, but it's really once every month or two. And so for those like 4 weeks between events, that you're sort of back at your home base. But Overwatch was really the first to try these city-based leagues and actually have people travel around and go to them. Same with Call of Duty, started that this year as well. So it's pretty rough. And I think that's something that having a good coaching staff can really help cement. So I think we have, in both of our leagues, I think we have the best coaches in the leagues. And that's something that we really put on them to make sure, right? I told them like, the thing that I want to do the least is have to go out and find more players because we didn't do a good job of managing them, right? Of not even just like not booking them like 3 practices a day, which we do a lot of times, right? Like we'll book them 3 back-to-back 2-hour blocks where they play against other teams to try to get better. Not just not doing that every day, but also like, hey, make sure that you're talking with them about their mental state. And we hired a conditioning coach who both does like physical stuff with them, and we built them a home gym in their team house too to really help with it, so that he could help them stay physically fit, but also to just talk and really like get mental clarity and think through a lot of that, because the value is so immense, especially in like if you feel bad, you're gonna play bad and you're gonna think bad, and in a game like Overwatch, you really don't have the opportunity to make mistakes. And like, I know it's rough for me when I have like a bad day and I'm like zoning out a little bit and I'm like, oh man, it just needs to be like 5 o'clock so I can like, you know, get home and like whatever's happening in my head just needs to like go away. You can't really do that when you're a pro gamer, right? Like you need to be playing and you need to be competing. And if you don't, and I mean, that's true for pro athletes and pro everything, right? Like if Kareem has a migraine, like that could affect the game in a way that like you lose, right? Like you just lose the championship. So we really wanted to put them in a place where we felt good about them, feeling better themselves too. And it's important to remember that a lot of these guys, like I said, are 18 and it might be their first time leaving. So I also feel some sense of responsibility to teach them the ways of life and to make sure that they're living good, and that when their parents like say like, oh, thank you so much for giving my son this opportunity. And like, hopefully we'll see him in like 2 years or whatever, right? You feel like, oh, I'm like this guy's parent now, right?
Yeah.
And I need to like make sure that they're doing what they need to stay healthy, because whoever was reminding them before isn't now. So I think that's a big portion of it as well.
Awesome. We got about 13 minutes or so, Alex. We still got a couple questions here, so
Cool.
I'm going to try and speed through these, all right? So
Okay.
This one's a great question. Do companies that purchase a team, like the NBA with the 2K League, see this as just another money-making strategy, or is there carryover to the main brand in the team as well?
It's a great question. I don't know how other teams see it, but for us specifically, or from my perspective specifically, I think there's tons of carryover, right? I think if you think about when you first load up a game like Madden or NBA 2K, it says like, what's your favorite team? And I always go to my favorite team, right? I don't pick like the best team or whatever, right? Like people from Cleveland are going to pick the Browns, even though they know it's going to make them worse in Madden, right? And I think that there is true carryover across those brands. And, you know, if you have the best NBA 2K League team, there's definitely ways that you can activate with your brand too in real life. So if, you know, the Rams have Madden activations at Rams games and training camp, and you can play as Rams players, and where maybe traditionally people playing those at those events maybe aren't super big football fans. I assume they are, but I think it's a really good way to continue to stay engaged with your favorite team.
Interesting. This was from Aaron Hodges, who did the TikTok session yesterday. Hi, Aaron. How can teams take advantage of one of their players who enjoys gaming? Where is the opportunity for them?
Yes, connect them with big creators and pro gamers to make content, right? And I think ultimately too, a lot of the guys want to do that, but they're also a little nervous, right? I know this is something that we've talked about before, is like when I was at YouTube, pro athletes would come to me and be like, I want to do it, but I don't have a setup. Or I purchased this $5,000 setup and people still aren't watching. What do I do?
Yeah.
And you have to be like, okay, so if you find interest, you need to figure out what you want to do. When you're making content in gaming, there's multiple sort of buckets that you can be in. It's like the Venn diagram, right? But you need to have some combination of them. You can be good, you can be funny, or you can just like be a good person and be entertaining and sort of bring that aspect to it. But you need to have some portion of it. So you can be bad at the game, and if you're a funny person and you make your content entertaining, people are going to watch, right? Most of the biggest content creators out there, they're pretty good, but they're not the best, right? The pros are playing on our teams. They're not the biggest content creators. So I think you really want to work with them to figure out what they want out of it, and then go out there and connect them to other people who can show them the ropes. That's something that we did with Josh Hart. And then I know he shared that with Myers Leonard and some of these other guys. But you really go and you figure out like, okay, what do you want to get out of it? Now let's go and find the right people to introduce you to, who they're going to be big fans of you. So they want it just as much as you want to learn from them, and then try to figure out exactly where to put them in. And we can help with that too. So if they want to play any of the games that our guys are in, more than happy to introduce them.
Great question here as well. Is it about growing esports or growing gaming? Will the success be driven more by personalities and charismatic gamers or elite esports competitors?
Great question. I'll answer the second one first. I think entertaining people will always be bigger, right? It's just the way it is. And it should be that way. And when I talked about what esports looks like in the future, I actually don't think it is what it is now, where you have like pro gamers and entertainers. I think it's going to be a blend of the two. And that's where Fortnite did really well, right? They brought in some of the best pro gamers, but they also brought in the biggest entertainers, and they came up with a format that they could all have some shot at competing, right? And that brought in the biggest audience and really revamped how you think about it. I think that's where the future of esports will be. But right now, it's always going to be the entertainers and the content creators that are the biggest. When it comes to, is it about esports or about growing gaming? I think gaming is always going to grow. I think gaming is in its like silent movie phase compared to the blockbusters that we have now. So I think that's always going to happen. It just is tied to innovation, and it's going to continue to grow and develop. But I think when it comes to developing esports, we just need to work on how we can attach to gaming as it's growing and really continue to join them in their innovation while creating something sustainable and long-term and forward-thinking. So
interesting. Next question is, new to the world of esports, what is the strategy behind social for esports? How do teams focus social strategy on creating a fan base for the players and teams?
Yeah, I mean, our guys are truly online, so they're creating content or at least at their computers and doing whatever you need them to do all day long. So I think we have really good access for social.
Are they actually creating the content, or are you supplying them with the team to potentially help them because you don't want to distract them from their focus?
It depends. Some people just do their own stuff and they're like, hey, if you want to help, that's great. Like, otherwise, I got it. And you're like, I love you. But I'd say most people, they just want a game. So they're not really about creating content. But since they're there and they have a webcam and they have a microphone because they need it to play, it's pretty easy to ask them like, hey, can you just like record a quick clip saying this thing so that we can put it out there? Or if you have 14 people in a house, that's a built-in reality show, right? So I think that you can make a lot of content around that. Yeah, but ultimately it's a little bit different in that regard.
Well, this plays into the next question. What kind of career opportunities are there in esports outside of actually playing or managing a team?
There's a ton. I mean, just like if you look at every other sports team of how many front office positions there really are, it's every facet of the business. And I think esports especially so. And one of the good things about it being such a young industry is that most of these teams have like 20 people on them, like helping run them, right? So you might be the social person, but you're also the marketing person, and you go out and you do community efforts and you do all these things. So there's a ton of opportunity, but I think it's also a ton of job opportunities, but I think there's also a ton of opportunity within each role to really learn and to grow and to get to do so much within them. So I'd say that there's a lot, and you could do anything from being on the teams to running the leagues to, being a partner who helps put on events. That's a big portion of it. Teams like us don't want to go out and hire full-time event people all the time. So we utilize production companies and event companies and everything. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to get involved.
Interesting. At Kroenke, do you guys see more opportunity in esports fans becoming basketball, hockey fans, the NBA, NHL fans becoming esports fans, or not really a consideration, and there's really no crossover and spillover?
No, I think there's a ton of crossover, right? If even we've talked about the athletes having crossover with gaming. I think that's just true of most people, right? If I think back to my friends in college or that I grew up with, where we'd watch, Sports Center Top 10 every night together, they're still playing games. It's just different games, right? So you have to figure out what esports those people or what games those people are playing and figure out how to activate esports around it. And say even at Kroenke, a lot of the people that we have who work on those traditional sports sides, they're like, oh, esports is cool. Like, are you guys going to make a Rocket League team? And there are Rocket League teams, right? So we could, right? Like, it's about finding out where those people are at and then creating the crossover between them. So I think it goes both ways on both sides of it.
Interesting. A couple questions from me real quick is, you are a football fan. You went to USC, right, Alex?
I went to University of Washington, but my wife went to USC.
That's
so
right.
I'm a fan by default.
Okay. Let's say you are a content creator at the University of Washington or USC, and you are creating content for the men's basketball team or the football team. What are some ideas that you might have that they should potentially apply to the football world?
From esports content?
Yeah. Or like, how can they potentially bridge that gap between the football and the esports worlds?
That's a good point. I mean, if you go to most of those colleges, and I know USC specifically actually has programs around esports, which is pretty cool. There are a ton of opportunities to create stuff, right? And I think that, like I said too, there's crossover between. Juju Smith-Schuster went to USC, and he streams on Twitch and is one of the biggest faces of Fortnite. Much to the chagrin probably of his team when he's playing instead of practicing during the weeks. But so I think that there is huge crossover there. And I think, again, it's really about identifying what you want to do. Esports content, you have to work so hard at because you have entertaining gameplay, but how many shots of a guy sitting at a desk looking at a screen can you really take? So I think they work really hard in editing and pulling together a narrative that is compelling with the little that you have to work with. Thankfully, you have hopefully exciting gameplay, unless you're just getting smoked by the other team. So you can get some stuff to work with, but I think there's a lot to be learned from how they pull those narratives together in a way, in an area where you don't have really cool visuals that people immediately associate with. If I watch a Rams video and there's this guy's hitting, there's huge bombs, there are obviously very beautiful visuals. you immediately can go like, that was cool. If you watch an esports video and you don't know about the game, you're like, I have no idea what the hell I was just looking at, right? So I think you have to rely on that narrative. And there's been a lot of documentaries and a lot of content that the sort of mainstream, like my dad can watch and understand. But that's probably what I would tell them to look at is look at the content and figure out what they do differently and try to apply it to yourself.
But in that example of Juju at USC, let's say he's still there right now. Would you potentially be telling him go stream on the USC football Twitch account?
Yeah, I think most of them, I would try. If I were him, I'd probably say no, because I'd want to like build my own thing, right? Which is something that we have a lot of, not issues, but it's something that we're very cognizant of on our team, is that these guys want to build their own brand, and we want them to build their own brand because we can pull it all together under our umbrella and go out and sell it as a team. But I probably would try to tell him that. He'd probably tell me, no, I want to go do it on my own channel, which I'd be supportive of as well.
Fair enough. What are you typically seeing with the demographics around esports fans? Age, female versus female?
Yeah, I mean, there's it's something like 52% of gamers are female, which I think most people don't know because they don't call themselves gamers, right? So if we were doing this in person right now, I would have started this talk probably by asking everyone, like, raise your hand if you call yourself a gamer, and then eventually gone down the steps to be like, how many of you play games, or how many of you play Candy Crush, or how many of you do this? And like, usually more people have their hands raised than not. And I think it's just the association of whether you're a gamer or not. And so the demographics there are a lot of female fans. I think people assume it's young kids. That can be true, but typically the esports fan is actually in that like 35 range. It's the 18 to 35 demo, but we think that the fans are typically on the higher side. Just because a lot of people too, if you think about it, when you start getting to a certain age or a certain stage in your career, you might not have the time to play Halo every weekend, but maybe for an hour or two a week, you really want to watch people who are good at it and watch them and try to learn and still be involved in the scene, or maybe just see something cool while you're hanging out, having a beer after work or something. So I think that demographic is older and more female than people think.
If How important is the quality of hardware and bandwidth with esports?
If you're going to play competitively, extremely important. Like our guys, if we tried to go out and get a computer sponsor and they gave us like less than ideal hardware, the guys would be like, find me, I'm not playing on that. Like, I won't do it. Right. Cause they're, to me, like the stuff that they talk about, I don't even know that I could ever see a difference, but they play so much and they're so in tune with it that for them, the hardware is really important. When it comes to console gamers, which is like your PlayStation or your Xbox, it's so much easier because there's only one piece of hardware. So it really comes down to like, as long as you have a good headset and a good monitor, like you shouldn't really have any issues. But I think if you're a general fan or just a gamer yourself and you're not really competing at the highest level, just play on what you have. It doesn't need to be that much more in depth than that.
What's your setup?
I have a very nice gaming PC because the league, we have them with all the pro gamers. But typically, for the longest time, I played League of Legends on a MacBook Pro and had my normal PlayStation. I still, to this day, there's like been 2 more releases of Xbox since then, and I still play on the same original Xbox. Xbox One, sorry, but they make them more powerful sort of incrementally over the course of the last 10 years. You can play still on the base one if you really want, and it doesn't matter too much. So that's what I do.
All right, Alex, last question. With esports within colleges, do athletes have a governing body like the NCAA?
Yeah, the NCAA. Yeah, a lot of times it still sort of falls in that same bucket. I know that a lot of times is a little bit different with colleges because some groups still, they're like, oh, it's Pac-12 esports, and sometimes it's just sort of more individual within the college itself. So it's somewhat dependent. College is a little less defined than I think every other region is. But if you look at like high school, it goes through like the normal high school sports association. So college is a little different. There are governing bodies. It's not as intense as like the NCAA is for other college sports, but there definitely are governing bodies trying to protect players in some of those instances.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so much. This was incredible. And thank you for everyone for attending this. Let me pop up your slide real quick. connect with the guy. Nikki dropped in a networking Google sheet for everyone to click into and a network amongst yourselves. Alex, appreciate your time. Please tell Sydney I said hello. Stay safe out there, everyone. Have a wonderful night.